Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to join Jörg Berstermann and thank you for joining us at the online launch of our latest yearbook, Hungarian Politics in 2020. I would also like to thank the Friedrich Hebel Stiftung for supporting this initiative. Thank you for the great cooperation and that they support the publication of this yearbook, which is already the 7th edition of this series. As the editor of the publication, just let me say a big thank you to my colleague Gábor Győri for his high-quality political analysis, and also to Gábor Scheiring, who also contributed with some great economic analysis to our yearbook and who happens to be our guest panelist today as well. As this yearbook is more than 80 pages long, it is of course impossible to cover all the details in 20 minutes. So I will just try to summarize the most interesting statements and conclusions of the publication. I will start now how 2020 was for the Hungarian government. Last year was all about COVID-19, of course, in Hungarian politics as well. Overall, it can be stated that the first wave of the coronavirus crisis has a relatively light impact on the country. And politically speaking, Hungary's governing party, Fidesz, emerged quite strong during the summer of 2020 from the first wave of the corona pandemic. By that time, during the first wave of the crisis, Fidesz even experienced a spike in their public support, which was already at a quite high level. However, in Hungary, the second wave has hit the country quite significantly, and we argue in our publication that the second wave of the coronavirus crisis has become the real test of Viktor Orbán's crisis management. The Orbán government, in theory, which is in charge of a small, highly centralized country and has two-thirds majority in the parliament, has extreme emergency powers, was in a very good situation in international comparison to respond forcefully to the pandemic. Its failure to do so in the second wave of the crisis is not merely a public policy disaster, in our view. It is the direct result of a decision which put forward economy over the goal of mitigating the health impact of the coronavirus. Although in a much more sophisticated manner than Donald Trump or Bolsonaro in Brazil, Orbán has essentially embraced the economy first mantra during the second wave of the crisis, and by the end of last year, the statistics reflected this, as Hungary ranked among the countries with the highest COVID-19 fatality rate. In the second wave of the crisis, in our analysis, according to our analysis, the government clearly reacted too late to the rising number of infections, as effective lockdown measures were only introduced in mid-November, on the 11th of November. The COVID-19 crisis also proved last year in Hungary that Fidesz is mainly interested in controlling the narrative. According to this narrative, this is a difficult battle. I mean, the COVID-19 crisis is a difficult battle, but Hungary in general is doing well because the government is manning the barricades. At the same time, Fidesz also aims to divert the attention away from the real problems. What I mean under real problems, the health, social and economic aspects of the COVID-19 crisis. And they try to put identity politics to the top of the political agenda. Since the migration issue appears to lose its impact, the Hungarian government started to use Hungary's LGBT community as the next scapegoat, inspired by similar campaigns by the Polish government. We think that the more the economy runs into trouble, undermining economic security, the more Fidesz is likely to push the culture war narratives, attacking gays, migrants, the Soros conspiracy, to avoid talking about how people's livelihoods are in danger. It has also become a commonplace in the last years in Hungary that the Fidesz government never misses an opportunity to change the political playing field in its favor. The developments of last year have proved that the Prime Minister is using the virus as a cover to pass measures to further strengthen his power, to institutionalize the funneling of public funds to allies, and to limit the chances of the opposition in the next elections. A prime example of this is the attack on opposition-run municipalities, which includes cutting back the tax income of local governments. It also includes increasing the tax burden on local governments and a ban on any local tax races this year in 2021. Another good example of how the government has misused the crisis for another goals is that the lawmakers of Fidesz also included a new definition of public funds into the constitution, which reduces transparency and ensures that Fidesz would keep control of certain institutions, universities, for example, and state resources, even if it lost the next elections. In our yearbook, we also stress that to a significant extent, Fidesz's strategy and actions this year will be shaped by the moves of the united opposition. It is important to point out at this point that regardless of their individual preferences, the voters of the opposition parties strongly support the strategy of their parties, which is that they will stand united against the government in 2022. However, a small minority who have some reservations about the joint list, which features some political figures that they might view negatively, will be the most crucial block of swing voters. And according to our analysis, they will be therefore the main targets of the Fidesz campaign in the upcoming slightly more than a year. It seems highly likely that Fidesz's campaign will focus intensely on persuading these voters that they cannot vote for former Prime Minister Gyurcsány, for example, if they are good conservatives, or, for example, for candidates of the formerly far-right Jobbik party if they are liberals and anti-racists. As several policy solutions researchers have confirmed it over the last years, Fidesz now relies on older, lower educated, and rural voting groups more than ever. This is the consequence of a strategic decision made by the Fidesz government on consolidating their support in rural areas and among lower educated voters in particular. Even with the strong position of the opposition in many cities, in rural Hungary, Fidesz retains a big lead, and according to the current standings, according to the polls, this would be still sufficient for an electoral victory. As a result, we also expect the government this year to prioritize rural Hungary in public spending until the next elections, as Fidesz considers the villages the main pillars of their next potential election win. On the opposition side of Hungarian politics, the most important development of 2020 was obviously the decision that the opposition parties will present a united front for the 2022 elections to potentially defeat Fidesz. The other major factor has been the real COVID coup, as we call it in the publication, which is the attack on opposition-run municipalities. First, a few words about this cooperation of opposition parties. First of all, we think that the parties are those who go after their voters, and not the voters are the followers of their parties in this respect, as the pressure was quite huge from opposition parties, from opposition voters, for the parties to finally join forces. Now the opposition parties declared that they will coordinate during the next elections, they will draft a joint program and nominate a common prime minister candidate. There were previously some public debates about whether they should run on a single party list or on two different lists, but the Fidesz government basically decided this issue for the opposition parties by increasing the threshold, the minimum number of candidates that the opposition should field at the next elections. They increased it from 27 to 71, which effectively rules out any other solution than a single joint list for the 6 major opposition parties. We believe that by the autumn of this year, the opposition will need to come up with a detailed framework, including a joint program and including concrete names, in which the 6 parties agree on how they will take on Fidesz. Primary elections can help the opposition to sort these issues out, and it seems to be sure that this year will be the year of opposition primary elections in Hungary. We think that it's an exceptional opportunity for the opposition, since the opposition will be able to set the political agenda for several weeks or months during the primary process. And if negative campaigning can be avoided during this process, the primary season can even help to clarify the opposition's joint electoral program. Regarding the attack on opposition-run municipalities, what I would like to highlight is that it's the government's political interest to make sure that the mayors supported by the opposition parties cannot become successful politicians. The developments of the last year confirmed that the Hungarian government aims to create a situation in which the cities that are run by opposition politicians can function at a minimum level, but their hands are so tied that they are unable to fulfill their electoral promises. We believe that this is the real goal of Viktor Orbán's strategy to punish the local governments during the COVID-19 crisis as well. We dedicate a separate chapter to the government's attack on opposition-run municipalities. I highly recommend it in the yearbook. But the bottom line is that the financial situation of the opposition-run municipalities is a disaster, and the financial situation of Budapest is particularly a disaster. As Mayor Gergely Karácsony said it in December last year, this year's budget of Budapest will be the budget of survival. It illustrates well the financial situation of Budapest, that the 2021 budget has less funds at its disposal than the Budapest budget of 2013, so the budget of 8 years ago. At the same time, we also argue in our yearbook that the mismanagement of the second wave of the COVID crisis offers the Hungarian opposition an opportunity, a window of opportunity to become a credible challenger of the Fidesz government. The health emergency, the economic and social crisis placed the Fidesz government in a very difficult situation, and it can be seen already in the numbers as Fidesz started to lose its popularity from August last year, and by now we can say that the united opposition is narrowly ahead of the government in the polls. Regarding the European scene, just very shortly, we believe that the most basic issue for the EU in 2020 was not the question of further deepening European integration, but whether they can successfully enforce compliance with the fundamental norms of rule of law and democracy. We stress in our publication that although the European leaders managed to avoid a political disaster last December, and they managed to unblock the EU budget and the recovery fund, but at the same time we think that the conflict with Hungary and Poland is only delayed and not resolved. Crucially for the Hungarian government, even though the new regulation will apply from January this year, it is quite likely that there will be no procedures under the rule of law conditions before the 2022 elections. Viktor Orbán's goal was to win some time, at least until the elections, and we believe that in this respect he succeeded. However, given the obvious incompatibilities between the Polish-Hungarian duo and the direction of European mainstream politics, further serious conflicts seem to be inevitable in the next years as well. We expect the European Union to remain a scapegoat in the electoral campaign and a constant target of government communication in the upcoming months as well. When it comes to major developments of the society, I would only emphasize now some insights about the increasing conservative influence over culture and education. In the last months, the government continued to increase this conservative influence over education. The Fidesz machine is currently taking more direct control of higher education. The government has apparently decided that some of the more prestigious institutions of higher education should be privatized and be put directly under the control of party officials or people with close ties to Fidesz. In this respect, Fidesz went big in 2020, and they captured 6 universities, and now there are negotiations about several more universities, so this trend can be expected to be continued this year as well. Honestly, these moves would have gone without any major scandal, without the massive protest of the students at the faculty of the University of Theatre and Film Arts last year. In the end, we argue in this publication that what is happening with higher education is not a novelty. Basically, the universities are just another front in the culture wars of Viktor Orbán that the Prime Minister openly proclaimed 2 years ago. To sum up, the fundamentals for the Orbán government are still solid in 2021. However, given that in all likelihood the next elections will be a close race against the united opposition, we expect further modifications to the electoral law or to the level playing field in the Hungarian context before the next elections. Fidesz honestly has never played softball with their 2/3 majority. And we expect the governing majority to do whatever it sees necessary to make sure that the opposition will be in an even more difficult situation to compete at the next elections. However, it must be underlined that the long-term political and economic impact of COVID-19 is still far from clear. Although Fidesz remains the largest party by far, recent polls suggest that its support is declining, and we don't know when this trend will end. The overall opposition is now slightly ahead in the polls. If the current trends persist, then the coming months, spring 2021, might be the first time for many years when, according to the calculations about a potential election result, the opposition might be able to win a majority if the elections were held at the time. However, it should be mentioned again that this statement is only true if the rules of the game are not changed before the next elections. For the opposition, the key change over the last year is that hope is back. Hope has returned to opposition circles, both to opposition politicians and voters. Now they believe that change is possible in this country. However, as I have already emphasized previously in this presentation, it's an important insight for the opposition that cooperation is vital, but not enough in itself for a win, because the opposition must be able to gain a foothold in some parts of rural Hungary. Therefore, for the opposition, one of the main challenges in 2021, and maybe the primary elections can help in this respect, is to find ways to reach the rural public while making sure that the urban electorate continues to support it. My final point is that although Fidesz is still the favorite to win the elections, there are three aspects that make the current situation different from the previous terms. First, Fidesz's low point and the negative tendencies in their public support is in a much later stage within the parliamentary term than in previous terms. So if Fidesz continues to drop, it has less time to recover now, approximately 1 year. Second, the economic impact of the pandemic is still unclear, and as economic stability has been one of the key pillars of Fidesz's public support, if this stability is gone, then the situation becomes dangerous for Fidesz. And finally, the opposition and its electorate have never been this united. On the whole, these three factors together might potentially make the next election campaign more challenging to Fidesz than ever over the last decade. Thank you very much for your attention, and hope you will be enjoying reading the yearbook. Thank you.